The restaurant was buzzing with its usual chaos, the clatter of plates mixing with the chatter of customers. Among the crowd, a man sat at the center table, his expensive suit and gold watch catching the dim light. He had an air of arrogance, the kind that made people notice him even before he spoke. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips as he scanned the room. "I have a challenge for anyone here," he announced loudly, his voice cutting through the noise. Heads turned, curiosity spreading like wildfire. "I'll give $100,000 to the person who can speak Chinese." The room fell silent for a moment, the words hanging in the air like an impossible promise. Some laughed nervously, while others exchanged doubtful glances. At a corner table, a young waitress moved swiftly, balancing plates and trays with practiced ease. She had been working there for years, and though most people overlooked her, she had a quiet strength that came from a life filled with challenges. She overheard the millionaire's words and paused for a moment, wiping her hands on her apron. Something stirred inside her, a mixture of amusement and determination. The people around her were skeptical, whispering to each other about how ridiculous the idea was. But she didn't whisper. She listened. She thought. The millionaire leaned forward, his eyes scanning the room as if daring someone to step up. "Come on, who's brave enough?" he taunted. "It can't be that hard. Speak a few words, win the money. Let's see who has some talent." Some customers snickered, shaking their heads, afraid to look foolish. Others murmured, wondering if anyone would actually try. The tension grew, almost tangible, as the restaurant waited for someone to speak. Every second stretched, and the millionaire's confidence seemed to grow with each passing heartbeat. Meanwhile, the waitress felt her pulse quicken. She had always known she was different, but she had never thought anyone outside her own world would notice. The challenge seemed impossible to everyone else, but for her, it was a moment to prove something, to herself, more than anyone else. She glanced around, seeing the skeptical faces, the laughing customers, and the mocking millionaire. A small smile tugged at her lips. She could feel their doubt like a weight, and yet it made her focus sharper, her resolve stronger. Finally, she straightened her back and walked toward the table. The room seemed to hold its breath. Conversations faded into silence as all eyes turned toward her. The millionaire raised an eyebrow, his smirk deepening, clearly entertained by the sight of a young waitress daring to accept his challenge. "You?" he asked, disbelief clear in his tone. "You think you can speak Chinese?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stopped in front of the table and looked him in the eyes, her gaze steady and calm. The tension in the room grew, thick and heavy, as if the air itself was waiting for her next move. "Why not?" she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. The millionaire laughed, a loud, mocking sound that echoed through the restaurant. "Why not?" he repeated, shaking his head. "Do you even know a word?" People around her whispered, some with amusement, others with doubt. The waitress didn't flinch. She had prepared for this moment, though no one knew it yet. Her heart beat steadily, not with fear, but with anticipation. She knew what she was capable of. The millionaire leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the spectacle. He waved his hand dismissively. "All right then, let's hear it. Speak Chinese, and the $100,000 is yours." The room was silent, the suspense almost unbearable. Every customer, every waiter, every staff member watched as she took a deep breath. Her lips moved, and the first words left her mouth. As she spoke, a quiet murmur spread through the crowd. The sound of her voice was different, confident and smooth, each word precise. The millionaire's eyes widened slightly, but he masked it quickly with another chuckle. Still, the room felt the shift, the impossible was about to happen. This young waitress, who had always been invisible, was commanding attention in a way no one had ever seen before. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, every mind wondering what would come next. Even as she continued to speak, some customers began to lean forward, curiosity overtaking their doubt. The tension had transformed into suspense, a feeling that something extraordinary was unfolding before their eyes. And for the waitress, this was just the beginning. The challenge had started, and already, the ordinary restaurant was no longer ordinary. The millionaire's smirk had faded slightly, replaced by a flicker of surprise, though he tried hard not to show it. As the final words of her first sentence left her lips, the room seemed to hold its breath again. People whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. The millionaire leaned forward, his smirk gone, replaced by a faint frown of uncertainty. He hadn't expected this. No one had. And in that moment, the young waitress stood tall, calm, and composed, knowing that the real challenge was only just beginning. The restaurant was buzzing with whispers. No one had expected what had just happened. The young waitress had spoken Chinese flawlessly, and the shock in the room was palpable. Customers stared, mouths slightly open, while the millionaire sat frozen, his confident smirk replaced by an uneasy frown. He had thought this challenge would be easy, an opportunity to mock someone for entertainment. But now, it seemed the joke had backfired. People began leaning forward in their chairs, trying to hear her better. Some couldn't believe their ears. Did she really just speak Chinese? One customer whispered to another. And so clearly, another shook his head, muttering under his breath. The waitress remained calm, her hands clasped in front of her. She had expected the surprise, but she also knew the real test was yet to come. The millionaire was not one to accept defeat gracefully. He straightened in his chair, trying to regain control of the situation. "Not bad," he said, his voice dripping with a mix of disbelief and sarcasm. "But can you do more? Is that all you've got?" The restaurant grew silent again, the tension thickening. Every eye was now fixed on the young waitress. The stakes had escalated, and the atmosphere was electric. It was no longer just a simple challenge, it was a moment that could change everything. The waitress tilted her head slightly, a small, knowing smile on her lips. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, but instead of fear, she felt a quiet confidence. She had learned to stay calm in high-pressure moments, and this was one of them. Taking a deep breath, she prepared to show the true extent of her skills. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, a mix of curiosity and disbelief filling the room. "Actually," she began softly, her voice carrying clearly across the room, "I know more than just Chinese." Her words hung in the air, making the crowd lean in closer. The millionaire's eyes narrowed, a flicker of intrigue replacing his earlier arrogance. "More languages?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. He was now genuinely curious, though he tried hard to hide it behind a mask of skepticism. The waitress nodded, her expression serious. "Yes. 9 languages." A ripple of shock moved through the restaurant. Some people gasped quietly, others simply stared, unable to believe what they were hearing. The millionaire leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. The confidence he had shown just moments ago was slowly being replaced by a mixture of disbelief and respect. She began to speak again, switching effortlessly from one language to another. Each word was precise, each accent perfect. The crowd watched, mesmerized, as this seemingly ordinary waitress transformed into someone extraordinary right before their eyes. Conversations had stopped, forks and spoons lay untouched on tables as everyone absorbed the incredible display. The restaurant that had felt normal just minutes ago now seemed alive with suspense and amazement. The millionaire's laughter had vanished completely. He sat silently, eyes wide, unable to interrupt her performance. Every language she spoke made his disbelief grow. It wasn't just skill, it was a reminder that appearances could be deceiving. This young woman, who had seemed so quiet and unassuming, had stunned the room with her talent. And there was more to her than anyone could imagine. The customers began whispering excitedly among themselves. Some were trying to guess how she had learned so many languages. Others were simply amazed at her confidence and poise. But the young waitress remained focused on the challenge, her mind calm, her heart steady. She knew this was not about showing off, it was about proving that determination and hard work could surpass doubt and mockery. As she finished her demonstration, the restaurant erupted in applause. People cheered quietly at first, then louder as the reality of what they had witnessed sank in. Even the millionaire, who had once mocked the challenge, now looked at her with a mix of surprise and admiration. He had underestimated her. Everyone had. And in that moment, the waitress knew that this was only the beginning of a story that would leave a mark on everyone in the room. The suspense lingered, thick and almost tangible, as the crowd waited for what would happen next. The millionaire, once so sure of himself, now faced the reality that he had been wrong to doubt her. And the young waitress, calm and confident, stood ready for whatever challenge came next, knowing that her moment to shine was only just beginning. The room was still buzzing with whispers, but now, all eyes were fixed on the young waitress. She had spoken Chinese flawlessly and even hinted at knowing more languages. The millionaire, who had been so sure of his power and control, now leaned forward in his chair, curiosity and disbelief battling in his expression. He had never expected this. No one had. The air was thick with anticipation, every heartbeat in the restaurant echoing the tension that had settled over the crowd. The waitress took a small step closer to the table, her eyes calm but full of quiet determination. She had made her decision. Accepting the challenge had been more than just a test of language, it was a moment to prove her worth in a world that had often ignored her. As she stood there, the crowd seemed to shrink around her, their whispers fading into silence. She could feel their doubt like a weight pressing on her shoulders, but instead of fear, it fueled her resolve. The millionaire's smirk had faded, replaced by a faint frown. "All right," he said slowly, his tone sharp but edged with uncertainty. Show me what you've got. Let's see how many languages you actually know." His words were like a spark in the quiet room, igniting the suspense even higher. The customers leaned forward in their chairs, some holding their breath, others exchanging incredulous glances. Everyone wanted to witness what would come next. The waitress straightened, took a deep breath, and began to speak again. First, she repeated her Chinese words, perfect and smooth, reminding everyone of her earlier skill. Then, almost effortlessly, she switched to Spanish, her accent flawless and precise. Gasps moved through the room like ripples on water. The millionaire's eyes widened, his confidence shaken. He had expected her to struggle, to falter, to show weakness, but she showed none. One by one, she spoke in French, German, Japanese, Italian, Russian, Arabic, and Hindi. Each language sounded natural, flowing easily from her lips. The customers leaned closer, captivated by the unexpected performance. Some whispered to each other in disbelief. Others simply watched in stunned silence, unsure whether they were witnessing reality or some impossible illusion. The suspense had reached its peak. No one knew what she would say next or how far her talent would go. The millionaire had gone completely silent. His previous laughter, arrogance, and mockery had vanished. He sat frozen, trying to process what he had just seen. The young waitress, once overlooked, had transformed the entire room with her presence and skill. The power of her talent was undeniable, and it was impossible to ignore. For the first time, he faced someone whose abilities far exceeded his expectations. Despite the attention, the waitress remained composed. She didn't look around for praise or admiration. Her focus was on the challenge, and on proving that determination, hard work, and self-belief could overcome skepticism and ridicule. She had prepared for this moment all her life, and now, in front of a crowd that doubted her, she shone brighter than ever. Every language she spoke was a testament to her resilience and intelligence. The crowd began to react, first with murmurs of amazement, then with quiet applause that quickly grew louder. People were clapping, some even standing, their disbelief turning into admiration. They had witnessed something extraordinary, an ordinary-looking waitress breaking barriers and expectations, showing that talent could be found in the most unexpected places. The suspense had transformed into awe, leaving the room buzzing with excitement. The millionaire finally spoke, his voice low but edged with respect. I didn't expect this," he admitted, barely hiding his astonishment. He looked at her not as a challenge to mock, but as someone who had earned admiration through skill and courage. The young waitress met his gaze, calm and unshaken, her inner strength radiating outward. She had not only accepted a challenge, she had changed the perception of everyone in that room. As the applause continued, a quiet smile appeared on her face. She knew that this moment was just the beginning. The challenge had been more than a test of language, it was a test of courage, determination, and the ability to rise above doubt. And as the room slowly settled, still buzzing with amazement, everyone could sense that her story was far from over. The real journey had only just begun. The restaurant was silent, the kind of silence that holds its breath. Every eye was still on the young waitress, whose calm composure seemed almost unreal. She had already stunned a room with Chinese and several other languages, but now, something deeper was about to unfold. The millionaire, who had been so confident at the beginning, sat frozen in his seat, his pride slowly giving way to genuine curiosity and maybe even a hint of fear. He had thought this would be a simple joke, but he had underestimated her entirely. The waitress took a small step forward, her movements quiet but deliberate. She knew that the suspense in the room was building, every person there was waiting for the next moment that would shock them. But she didn't rush. She let the silence grow, letting the tension thicken like a storm about to break. She glanced at the millionaire, her eyes steady, and for the first time, a faint smile appeared on her lips. It wasn't arrogance, it was quiet confidence, the kind that comes from knowing your worth. "You've seen a few languages," she said softly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "But there's more." Her voice carried clearly across the room, cutting through the murmurs and whispers. The millionaire leaned forward slightly, as if the words themselves had hooked him, pulling him into the reality that this challenge was far beyond what he had imagined. He tried to hide it, tried to maintain his arrogance, but he could not. The young waitress was too composed, too skilled, and the suspense was almost unbearable. She began again, this time faster, moving through the languages with fluid grace. One by one, the words left her lips, perfect and confident, each sentence a testament to her dedication. She spoke Japanese, then switched to French, German, and Spanish, and with every word, the room's disbelief grew. People whispered to each other, some gasping quietly, others simply staring in wide-eyed amazement. The waitress was no longer just a worker behind the counter, she had become the center of the room's attention, commanding respect and awe. The millionaire's expression had completely changed. His smirk had disappeared, replaced by a mixture of astonishment and a reluctant respect. He had mocked her in the beginning, assuming she would falter, but she had done more than speak a single language, she had shown a depth of skill he had never anticipated. His fingers drummed nervously on the table as he tried to regain some control, but the more she spoke, the less power he seemed to have over the room. The audience's reactions grew louder. Murmurs became whispers of admiration, whispers became soft gasps, and gasps turned into applause. Some customers were leaning forward, captivated, unable to believe what they were witnessing. The suspense that had hung in the room from the beginning now transformed into awe and excitement. No one had expected this young waitress to carry herself with such confidence, intelligence, and poise. Yet, amid all the amazement, she remained calm. She knew that this moment was bigger than applause or recognition. It was about proving that hard work, determination, and quiet strength could overcome doubt and mockery. She had faced a room of skeptics, and she had made them pause, think, and admire her. That power, the ability to make people reconsider their assumptions, was hers alone. The millionaire finally broke the silence, his voice low and controlled, though a trace of disbelief lingered. You really know all these languages?" he asked, almost whispering. There was no mockery now, only an attempt to understand the reality in front of him. The young waitress simply nodded, her gaze unwavering. She had not come here to argue or explain. Her actions spoke louder than words. As she finished the last few sentences, the room erupted in a mix of applause and stunned silence. People were amazed, some even standing to acknowledge her skill. The suspense lingered, but it had shifted. It was no longer about doubt or challenge, it was about admiration, about witnessing someone extraordinary rise above expectation. And in the midst of it all, the young waitress stood tall, calm, and composed, knowing that the real story, the deeper part of her journey, was only beginning. The restaurant had become electric, every eye fixed on the young waitress. The suspense had reached its peak. She had already stunned everyone with several languages, but now she was about to reveal the full extent of her talent. The millionaire, who had begun the challenge with mockery and arrogance, now sat in disbelief. His smirk had completely disappeared, replaced by a mixture of shock and admiration. He had no idea what was coming next. The waitress took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was more than a demonstration of skill, it was a moment of truth, a chance to show what she had worked so hard to achieve. She began speaking, switching seamlessly from one language to another. Spanish, French, German, Japanese, each one flowed naturally from her lips. The crowd leaned closer, captivated, their previous skepticism fading with every word. Whispers of awe spread through the room like wildfire. Then she moved to Italian, Russian, Arabic, and Hindi. Each language sounded perfect, confident, and effortless. People's jaws dropped, some covering their mouths in shock. The millionaire leaned forward, unable to hide his astonishment. He had underestimated her entirely. What had seemed like a simple challenge had turned into a remarkable display of intelligence, talent, and determination. The audience could hardly believe what they were witnessing. A soft murmur of admiration rose from the crowd. Some customers whispered about her dedication, imagining the years it must have taken to learn so many languages. Others simply stared, completely captivated, unable to look away. The young waitress stood calm and composed, aware of the effect she was having. She did not speak for praise or attention, she spoke to prove a point, that hard work and persistence could defy expectations. The millionaire sat silently, his expression a mix of disbelief and respect. He had thought he could mock anyone for entertainment, but this young woman had turned the situation completely around. For the first time, he felt small in comparison to her talent. He realized that appearances could be deceiving, that quiet strength could surpass arrogance, and that the world often underestimated those who worked quietly behind the scenes. The applause started slowly, then grew louder, echoing through the restaurant. Customers clapped and cheered, some standing to show their admiration. The young waitress finally paused, her voice calm, her heart steady. She had proven herself beyond anyone's doubt. But she also knew this moment was about more than applause. It was about showing that resilience, confidence, and skill could change the way people saw her, and maybe even the way they saw the world. The suspense in the room had transformed into pure awe. People were whispering, pointing, and smiling, all amazed at what they had witnessed. Even the millionaire could no longer hide his admiration. He leaned back in his chair, silent, unable to find the words to respond. This young waitress, who had appeared ordinary, had now become extraordinary in the eyes of everyone present. As she straightened and looked around the room, a quiet smile appeared on her face. The challenge had been more than about money, it had been about respect, confidence, and breaking barriers. She had faced doubt, mockery, and disbelief, and had emerged victorious, not through arrogance, but through skill and determination. The room had witnessed something unforgettable, a story that would be talked about long after that day. And while the applause continued, the young waitress knew that her journey was far from over. The $100,000 challenge had been a step, a moment of recognition, but it was only part of a larger story, a story about perseverance, talent, and the power to defy expectation. The suspense had reached a climax, but the impact of her actions would echo far beyond that restaurant, leaving everyone in awe of what a determined heart could achieve. The room had quieted down, but the energy was far from gone. Every eye still followed the young waitress, who stood calmly in the center of attention. The applause from the crowd had slowed to soft murmurs, but the tension had returned, heavier than before. Everyone waited to see what the millionaire would do next. His confidence, which had dominated the room at the beginning, was gone. Now he faced a reality he had never imagined, he had been proven wrong, and he knew it. He leaned back in his chair, staring at her with a mix of shock, admiration, and uncertainty. "I didn't expect this," he admitted, his voice quieter than before. There was no laughter, no mockery, only awe and a hint of humility. He had underestimated her talent, her determination, and the quiet power she carried within her. For the first time, he realized that money and arrogance could not measure someone's true worth. The young waitress met his gaze steadily. She did not boast or speak proudly. She had come to accept a challenge, and now she had proven herself. Her heart was calm, but inside, she felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had achieved something extraordinary. The suspense had shifted. It was no longer about whether she could win, it was about what the millionaire would do next, how he would respond to her undeniable skill and courage. He opened his wallet slowly, as if reluctant to admit defeat, and pulled out a thick stack of bills. The room seemed to hold its breath again. Every customer, every staff member, and even the kitchen crew watched in silence, waiting for the moment that would seal the challenge. The young waitress stood patiently, her eyes calm, yet her presence filled the room with a quiet authority. The millionaire handed her the money, his hands slightly shaking. You've earned this," he said, still in disbelief. There was a pause, heavy and almost sacred, as the significance of the moment settled in. It was not just about $100,000, it was about recognition, respect, and the shattering of assumptions. The applause erupted once more, louder this time, as everyone realized the enormity of what had just happened. The young waitress accepted the money without hesitation, but she also offered a soft smile that carried more meaning than the cash itself. Her gesture, calm and humble, spoke volumes about her character. She had proved that talent and determination could overcome doubt and mockery. She had turned what was supposed to be a simple challenge into a life-changing moment, not just for herself, but for everyone who had witnessed it. The millionaire looked at her again, his eyes no longer mocking but thoughtful. He had learned an important lesson, one that money could not buy. He realized that judging someone by appearance or circumstance could lead to underestimating greatness. He had come seeking entertainment, but he had found inspiration instead. The room, too, seemed to shift. Customers whispered among themselves, some nodding, others shaking their heads in amazement. The story of the young waitress had left a mark on everyone present. The suspense lingered even after the money changed hands. People were still talking, still processing what had happened. But the tension was now mixed with admiration, respect, and wonder. The young waitress had taken a challenge, faced doubt, and emerged victorious in a way that no one could have anticipated. Her journey was far from over, but this moment had already made her unforgettable. And as she walked back to her station, calm and composed, the applause and whispers followed her like a shadow. The millionaire remained seated, reflecting silently on the events that had unfolded. He had learned that humility and respect were sometimes earned in the most unexpected ways, and that a quiet, determined person could command attention, admiration, and even change the hearts of those who once doubted them. The applause had finally quieted, but the energy in the restaurant was far from gone. The young waitress returned to her station, but she did so with a calm dignity that drew the eyes of everyone in the room. People whispered to each other, still trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Some were amazed by her skill, others inspired by her confidence, and a few simply stunned into silence. The suspense had shifted. It was no longer about whether she could succeed, but about the lasting impact of her actions. The millionaire remained seated at the table, staring at her as if trying to take in the full reality. He had begun the challenge with mockery, seeing it as a chance for entertainment. Now, he realized that he had learned something far more valuable. This young waitress, once invisible to him, had not only succeeded in the challenge, she had changed the energy of the entire room and taught a lesson about respect, humility, and talent. As the customers began talking amongst themselves, some approached her, shaking their heads in amazement. "I've never seen anything like that," one whispered. Another said, "She's incredible, so calm and confident too." The young waitress nodded politely, but inside, she felt a quiet warmth. It wasn't just about winning the money, it was about being seen, being respected, and showing the world what she was capable of. The millionaire finally spoke, his voice low but sincere. You really impressed me." Not many could do what you just did." His words carried a weight they hadn't had at the beginning. He wasn't just acknowledging her skill, he was acknowledging her courage, her preparation, and her determination. The realization seemed to hit him that money and arrogance alone could never replace talent and resilience. The young waitress smiled softly, a subtle glow of pride in her eyes. She had faced doubt, mockery, and a room full of skeptics, and had risen above it all. But more than that, she had inspired the people around her. The applause started again, this time from multiple corners of the restaurant, more heartfelt than before. People were not just celebrating her talent, they were celebrating her spirit. Some customers began taking out their phones, quietly recording or whispering stories to each other. They wanted to remember this moment, a moment when someone ordinary on the outside proved extraordinary on the inside. The suspense had transformed into admiration, awe, and inspiration. The young waitress had become more than a challenge winner, she had become a symbol of determination and self-belief. Even the millionaire looked around at the crowd, seeing their reaction to her courage and skill. He realized that his own life had been changed in that short period. He had intended to mock and test, but instead, he had witnessed something rare and powerful, the impact of confidence, hard work, and humility combined. His earlier arrogance had crumbled, replaced by respect and a quiet admiration that he could not ignore. As she returned fully to her work, balancing trays and serving customers, the atmosphere of the restaurant had shifted completely. People were no longer just eating, they were inspired, talking, and remembering. The suspense that had gripped the room had given way to an emotional resonance that would stay long after the challenge ended. The young waitress had not only won the $100,000, she had won the hearts and respect of everyone present. And as the crowd continued to whisper and smile, the young waitress felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. She knew that this day would be remembered, not just for the money or the languages she spoke, but for the courage it took to step forward, face doubt, and prove that true talent and determination could defy expectations. The journey was far from over, but this moment had become a turning point, a memory that would inspire her and everyone around her for years to come. The restaurant had finally settled into a calm buzz, but the impact of what had happened lingered in the air like electricity. The young waitress stood quietly at her station, a faint smile on her lips, as the crowd slowly returned to their meals. Yet, the whispers and glances told her that no one would forget this day. She had stepped into a challenge, faced doubt, and transformed the expectations of everyone around her. What had started as a simple test had become a moment of awe, respect, and inspiration. The millionaire remained at his table, staring thoughtfully at her. He had come with confidence and arrogance, expecting to entertain himself at the expense of someone else. Instead, he had witnessed something extraordinary, a quiet, determined young woman proving that skill, intelligence, and courage mattered far more than wealth or appearances. He reached out his hand, a gesture of acknowledgement and respect, and said softly, "You've truly earned not only the money but everyone's admiration." The young waitress accepted his hand with a nod, her calm composure unchanged. She didn't boast or flaunt her victory. The $100,000 was significant, yes, but the real triumph was the recognition she had earned and the lesson she had shared with everyone in the room. People watched, some leaning forward to offer congratulations, others simply shaking their heads in disbelief at the confidence and skill she had displayed. As the crowd began to leave, many approached her to share words of encouragement. "You've inspired me," one whispered. Another said, "I'll never underestimate anyone again." The young waitress listened quietly, her heart swelling not with pride, but with the satisfaction of having changed minds and hearts. Her story was no longer just hers, it belonged to everyone who had witnessed it, a reminder that determination and courage could break through doubt and mockery. Even the millionaire lingered a moment longer, his expression softened by humility. He had intended to make a spectacle, but instead, he had learned a powerful lesson: never judge someone by appearances, never underestimate quiet determination, and never mistake arrogance for strength. The room, which had been filled with skepticism and tension just moments ago, now radiated respect, admiration, and inspiration. The young waitress returned fully to her work, but the energy around her had changed. Customers treated her with newfound respect, colleagues looked at her differently, and the millionaire, once a figure of arrogance, had learned the weight of humility. The $100,000 she had earned was more than money, it was a symbol of recognition, perseverance, and the power of believing in oneself. As the day drew to a close, the young waitress looked around the emptying restaurant, a quiet smile on her face. She had faced a challenge, conquered it, and in the process, left an unforgettable mark on everyone who had witnessed her journey. The suspense, the doubt, the amazement, they had all transformed into a powerful story of courage and triumph. And as she wiped her hands on her apron, preparing to leave, she knew that this day would stay with her forever. Not because of the money, or the applause, or the languages she spoke, but because she had shown the world that determination, courage, and a quiet, steady confidence could defy expectation and leave a lasting impact. The restaurant may have returned to its normal rhythm, but the story of the young waitress, the one who stunned everyone and changed minds, would echo far beyond these walls, inspiring anyone who heard it to believe in themselves and never underestimate what one person can achieve.